my name is Rory Huston. I have been in the construction industry for about 20 years. I'm the head of knowledge management at Cundall. I'm a certified knowledge manager with the Knowledge Management Institute and a chartered knowledge manager with CILIP. I was the second in the country, in fact. I'm also the knowledge management vice chair with CILIP's Knowledge Management and Information Group. I've got a keen interest in organisational improvement and collaboration and sustainable digital transformation. And Cundall are a multidisciplinary engineering consultancy with around 10 different disciplines. We've got acoustic engineering to vertical transportation, building services, civils, structures, sustainability, all kinds. We're based from the UK all the way across to Australia. So we have offices from Belfast to Brisbane and many places in between. And we were the first carbon neutral engineering consultancy certified with the Carbon Trust. We like to win awards, of course. We were the Consultancy of the Year at the Education Estates Awards and Construction News Awards recently. And if you look very carefully in the bottom corner, you'll see me bristling with pride holding the CIBSE Building Performance Award in 2019. So, change management. A very startling fact that I came across was that 70% of change programs fail, which was from research from McKinsey. And they cited lots of different reasons for change, but the key ones were employee resistance or apathy and inadequate management support. But there are lots of other reasons, such as inefficient or insufficient education and training, poor leadership, inappropriate company culture for the change that's being received, inadequate resources given, poor communication, inappropriate planning, insufficient customer focus and lack of monitoring systems. So there's lots of different reasons why your programs may fail, and there is a big chunk of programs that do fail. So just to try and focus your mind, as you're thinking about this, you're probably watching this because you're interested in change programs within your company. So just have a little think and add up, how many change programs are you running at the moment? So I can think of maybe eight or nine that we're running at the moment, for example. What would you estimate, just finger in the air, what would you estimate the total budget of those programs is? So would you say, for example, they are a 10 grand program or 100 grand program, or bigger or smaller? And just try and do a quick inventory of those programs and what would be the total budget of all those. Here's the challenging part. Pick 2 out of 3 of those that you've listed that are going to fail. And of those programs that are going to fail, just add up what the total budget of that failure is. And now finally, how are you going to tell your CEO or the person who controls the budgets around this? What are you going to tell them? What's the message? Here are, let's just say you had £1 million worth of budget. Here is £1 million of budget that is likely to not have the impacts that we thought it would. That's going to be an interesting conversation. So it's important that we all try and understand change and change management principles if we're involved in programs within companies. It would be great if the way that change management worked was we tell people about the change, they do it, the change has happened. And that's sadly the way that most change management programs or new initiatives and programs are approached. We emailed once about some new change to some software and they're expected to use it, and everyone pats themselves on the backs, walks away and doesn't go back to see how well these things are adopted. A lot of the reason why change isn't adopted is this lovely thing we have here, the brain. And people's reactions to change can vary considerably. Depending on how the change is presented to them, some people can see things as a threat, some people can see it as an opportunity missed, or they might just be overloaded with all the other changes that are happening that they just don't have time to deal with it. If these things are important, we need to appeal to people's squeegee brains and make sure they understand what we're doing and why, and then give them the space to prioritize this above other things that may be important too. As you would expect, there are a lot of different change models out there. The top ones that you will hear talked about are Lewin's change model, Prosci's ADKAR, Kotter's 8 steps of change, Kubler-Ross, McKinsey 7s, there's quite a few different ones. Some models of change, you might not even realize a change model. So this is the Kubler-Ross model of change, which is otherwise known as the 5 stages of grief. And it's sort of not necessarily right for every person every time, but it's a model that quite a few people have found helpful, including myself. And it suggests that people will go through stages of shock, denial, anger, depression, and acceptance as they experience grief. Now, one of the things that they're very keen to point out with this model, and is the same with most other change models as well, is that you don't necessarily always go through this in a linear progression. There may be cycles. You may go back to the start, you may move around in a little bit, but it's a model that helps you just sort of think about where you are in this sort of process. The ones that I particularly like are the Kotter 8 steps of change and the ADKAR model and the hype cycle, which I'll talk about in a minute. So the Kotter 8 steps of change model, for me, tends to talk more about how you do things from an organizational perspective, from a donor perspective of the change, so the people creating the change. And it starts off with, you need to create that sense of urgency and understand what is the thing that means that this change has to happen now? How do you describe this? Why is this important to people? You then got to start to build a guiding coalition, and this sort of talks about a powerful coalition of people who can unlock barriers for you, who understand the subject, who have influence. You need to start to form a sort of strategic vision of what the future is going to look like and what changes you're going to need to be making. And then start to enlist a volunteer army, so people who are going to be attracted by this vision and help you, move heaven and earth to make these changes happen. When they start moving, you need to be removing barriers in front of them, be that time, be that resources, be that other calls on their time, and start to generate short-term wins that you can communicate to show that the plan is working. And then you need to start sustaining that acceleration with more change and introducing the change into business as usual. Another model, the Prosci ADKAR model, I find is very much focused on the individual and how they're receiving change, and it addresses more the personal motivations and feelings of those undergoing the change. So it talks about, first of all, an awareness. The initials ADKAR are awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So it talks about, first of all, knowing that there is a need to change. Then the desire section is wanting to change. Knowledge is how to make that change happen. It might be if we're asking someone to perform a new project delivery sort of methodology, that they need to have some instructions and step-by-step guides to do that the first time. And then they need to have the ability to do it, so they've been given the right skills or training and the opportunities to practice those skills, and then continual reinforcement till it becomes habit. One of the things that you need to really think about with this kind of approach as well is, what's in it for me? What's in it for the individual who you're asking to change versus all the other things that are happening in their life? And how is this going to make their lives better? And this is another model called the hype cycle, which I quite like. The intention of the hype cycle is there is a technology trigger at the beginning. Suddenly, people start talking about this technology, about all the amazing things that it can do. People will then start to realize that maybe the amazing things that it can do aren't going to be ready for quite a while, and there'll be what's called the trough of disillusionment. Sometimes this is where new innovations then continue to crash and burn and die, which is called the chasm of despair. And things will move up, though, into the slope of enlightenment to the product of the plateau of productivity. And it's interesting when you cross-reference this with sort of technology adoption curves, where you often talk about different people being, a small number of people being innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, etc. The characteristic of an innovator is someone who likes new, shiny technology things. They like to play with stuff, and they will probably fail 80% of the time, but the things that they do come out with are really interesting and really good. The early adopters tend to look at what the innovators are doing and pick out the good stuff and start to make them easier to use and document things and chisel off the corners and make them more usable in the real world. And the early majority will then look at some stuff from the early adopters. that's been documented, that's been made easy for them to use and go, yeah, that's clearly the better way to do things. I will take the time to learn that new approach. The late majority tend to follow the early majority because it's the right thing, seems like the right thing to do. And I think laggards probably speaks for itself, the people that need strong persuasion to change their ways, even if they're shown it's a better way of doing things. And to quote one of my friends, Tamsin, who's a climate scientist and shamelessly use the name of her blog, all models, though, are wrong. Some are useful, though. So all models basically are intrinsically, because they're a model, not fully correct. So these different change models are there as a sort of mental model to help you think about how you've got to talk to different people, and you've got to be nimble, you've got to be aware of what's happening in your business and start to try and understand what different characters of people are doing what kind of behaviors to make this change sort of happen and become mainstream. So how would I typically start a program? This is just sort of the rough process that I've used for a couple of programs, such as our digital engineering program or our project management initiatives. Forgive the wordiness of this slide, but the first thing really is to try and establish the need for the program. So is this really needed? Is there a sense of urgency? Is there lots of support at different levels? Is there a common vision of what needs to be done? Does this change need to be made now, and on what basis? How does this compare to other change programs, which is more important? And do your staff have the capacity to absorb more change? Are you already throwing 10 different new pieces of software at them in that month, and they wouldn't have any spare time amongst their project work to actually do this? So there's a whole series of questions before you really get going on a program that you need to sort of ask yourself. And if you can successfully answer these sort of questions and start to map the above, then maybe start to draft that sense of urgency and start to discuss it with some of the key stakeholders you've identified. So you've got the purpose, now you're going to start to build your guiding coalition. So what I find is good then is start to have one-on-one discussions with the stakeholders and identify their positions and start to align everyone together. Try and develop a common language for how you're going to have these discussions, sort of a model that you can kick around and debate based on those discussions, so that then when you get people together to have a bit of a workshop, you'll start to tease out what are the nuances, what are the things that need to be resolved, and what's the most important. So talk about that model in a workshop, and I find things like Mural actually have been really helpful in workshops when you have a mixture of introverts and extroverts on a call. Don't have some people in a meeting room, some people online. That just never works. It's good to have people in the same either physical or virtual spaces. And Mural's good because the introverts will sit there happily typing away, putting their post-it notes up, and then everyone can comment and discuss them. And the extroverts will be, talking, and people will be making notes of what they're saying when they make good points. So it's a good sort of play space, I think, for getting different people to work together. Then you can start to develop your vision together for, what are the outcomes you want to see when you're done, and you can then start to develop terms of references and things for how often you're going to meet and how you're going to work together to achieve this. So you're starting to work your way around the Kotter 8 steps, and you've got your coalition going. You're starting to form your strategic vision. So now you probably need to start thinking about the people receiving the change and start to make them aware that a change is coming, and start to try and sell this, that this is going to be something that's going to be a desirable thing for them to do, for them to get involved in. And that's where the ADKAR model starts to become quite useful. Again, another wordy slide. Apologies for that. So you need to start thinking about your communication plan, how you're going to talk to people about what you're doing. And that will depend on what the outcomes you're hoping for, whether it's going to be a top-down approach, whether it's going to be bottom-up and you're asking people to identify what they're going to be doing. But you need to be encouraging people who are going to be affected by the change to be talking in those communications, so people feel that it's not something they're being told from a distance, that it is someone, there's someone close to them who they admire, who is, supportive of this change and is going to, help you get buy-in. You'll be starting to get your objectives down and things that you're going to be trying to achieve. And I highly recommend the use of SMART objectives. SMART objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. For example, if you said, I want to improve the performance of this team, that isn't a SMART objective. If you wanted to say, I want to improve the turnover this team is working on from this percent to this percent, this percent to this percent in 3 months, then you're starting to get nearer a SMART objective. Only allow 1 or 2 objectives to be open at any one time. Try and keep the number of objectives open quite small, so you're getting everybody working tightly on those and getting them finished quickly, rather than letting multiple things drag on and not quite ever get completed. You'll get people's focus and attention for a few months, and then they might start to drift off and be attracted by some other program. So try and make sure that when people are working with you, that they're all working as closely as you can together to achieve some small achievable goals. This starts to move into a sort of an agile approach of working. The other thing is, of course, make sure you prioritize what you're doing. So when you are getting those lists of objectives together, try and pick off the either the quick wins that are low effort and high impact, or things that are going to have a significant impact. Try to avoid low impact, hard slog things, which can be a problem. So you're starting to get to a position where you're starting to achieve a lot of actions. You've got a lot of things out there for people to consume and start to use, and for the change to be absorbed. You've made people aware of the change and they've got the desire to change. Now you need to make it easy for them to grab hold of the knowledge of how to change. And that might be things like toolkits or intranet pages or training sessions and webinars. So that's the point where you need to start sort of anchoring into those sort of bits. And this is probably where you are now. You're probably at that point of you've got past the early adopters, you're getting the early majority engaged, and this is where you really need to dig in and start keep pushing, keep doing what you're doing. Things like publicly starting to measure and dashboard things is a good idea. Make sure that you listen to what's working and what doesn't work from all of your staff. So go out, seek feedback, be quite proactive in that, and act on that feedback. So re-engineer processes and tools where you need things. It might seem quite trivial, some of the feedback you get, but chipping away at these and just re-engineering the tools to remove every little barrier does make quite a big difference over time. And just train. Make sure you're providing lots of training. You're trying to get as many champions across the business who can help other people as well, and make all the resources available on your intranet or other sources. You're starting to get to the point where you're now instituting the change, and it might be worth thinking about how you restructure your teams. Is the team that you've got still the right one? There's a thing in how track teams are set up in cycling. The first rider is often very strong and able to get the bikes going very quickly. The person at the back has the ability to have a much higher top speed and longer endurance. So the person you have running your project at the end of deployment isn't necessarily going to be the same as the person who starts it. So you might need to have some tough decisions. It's likely that the first person was more of the innovator character, and the last person running it is more of the late majority type person. So you need to consider how you manage that, and centralized resources versus off-project heroics are quite interesting. But the thing to be really clear on is roles and responsibilities, expectations and performance of what you want from people, and that will change, and you'll need to review that reasonably regularly, say every year. And at this point, you probably should also think about the design of your organization with regards to this project. Do you need to look at some organizational design things? And there's quite a useful model called the Galbraith star model of organizational design to consider how things like people's skills and mindsets are developed, how the structure for making decisions is made, how processes and rewards are there. And by rewards, we mean things like kudos and promotions rather than financial. And then you're probably back to the start to do the next wave of your program. So it can take a while. Typical change programs take 2 years or so, at least, to run through, depending on the nature of the change. But you can achieve success going through these stages and bringing people along with you is really useful. So that's a method that I use for change management in the knowledge management projects and things that I've been associated with. And I hope you have found this useful. The final thing that I just want to say is you will have multiple projects on the go. So how you think about the portfolio of your change projects and how you make sure that you get those projects working on a similar language with similar budgeting processes, and that those leaders of those programs are talking to each other, so you can make sure that you coordinate which bits of change are happening when, is quite important too for your staff, so they can see something that's reasonably consistent. So thank you for listening. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Rory Huston, or get in touch via Kundal. Hope this was of benefit to you. Thank you.